It began with a silence that nobody inside the palace could explain. One moment, the royal calendar was moving as planned. The next, senior aides were canceling meetings, private secretaries were summoned behind closed doors, and whispers began spreading through corridors that had witnessed generations of royal crises. Something extraordinary had happened, and at the center of it all stood King Charles, preparing an announcement that would leave the entire United Kingdom stunned. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For days, the palace tried to make everything look ordinary. The statements were calm. The schedules appeared controlled. The language was careful, almost too careful. But behind that polished surface, something colder was moving. Reports suggest that Buckingham Palace staff noticed sudden changes in the King's diary, meetings being delayed without explanation, and senior officials entering discussions that were not placed on the public calendar. It was not panic. It was worse than panic. It was preparation. And preparation inside the monarchy usually means one thing. The public is about to learn something the palace has known for much longer. King Charles had carried the weight of the crown through illness, pressure, family division, and constant public judgment. Yet this time, insiders whispered that the conversation was no longer about one event, one appearance, or one difficult week. It was about his royal future itself. How much could he continue? How far could duty push a man already tested by health concerns and history's demands? And who would protect the institution if the king chose to step back from the pace that had defined his reign? The secrecy only deepened when private secretaries began tightening communication around the royal household. Political circles heard fragments. Royal correspondents sensed movement. Even those normally briefed by palace insiders were left with cautious silence. That silence became the loudest message of all. The monarchy was standing at the edge of a decision that could reshape its next chapter, and no one wanted to speak too soon. Then came the most unsettling detail. Sources close to the royal machine suggested this was not a sudden emotional reaction from Charles, but a deeply personal decision shaped over months. A decision weighed against duty, legacy, public trust, and the future of William's role. The king was not merely preparing words. He was preparing the nation for a change in expectation, a shift in royal gravity, and perhaps the clearest sign yet that the crown was already looking beyond the present moment. But what appeared to be a sudden announcement was actually the result of months of private conversations, difficult choices, and a future that had been quietly taking shape behind palace walls. For months, the public saw a king determined to carry on. Yet behind the scenes, reports suggest Charles was confronting questions far bigger than daily royal duties. The crown demanded stability. The nation demanded certainty, and Charles faced a decision that no monarch ever wishes to make. The strain had been building quietly, not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 small signs that royal watchers began to notice. A reduced pace here, a reshuffled duty there, a statement written with unusual caution. To the public, it looked like careful management. Inside the royal machine, it felt like something heavier. King Charles had spent his entire life preparing for the throne. Yet now, after finally reaching the summit, he was being forced to measure every appearance, every meeting, every journey against the brutal limits of health, time, and responsibility. Reports suggest senior advisors were not simply discussing schedules anymore. They were discussing endurance. They were asking how a monarchy built on continuity could remain steady if its sovereign needed to preserve his strength. That question was delicate, almost forbidden, because it touched the deepest fear of any royal household. Uncertainty at the top. The crown can survive scandal. It can survive criticism. It can even survive family wounds exposed to the world. But it cannot easily survive confusion about who carries the burden when the burden becomes too heavy. That was where Prince William's role began to matter more than ever. Insiders claimed that the Prince of Wales was being drawn into more serious conversations, not as a symbol but as a safeguard. His presence reassured the system. His steady public role gave the palace space to breathe. Yet it also revealed a truth no one wished to say too loudly. The future was no longer distant. It was moving closer, step by step, meeting by meeting, decision by decision. Charles, according to those familiar with the mood around the palace, did not want drama. He didn't want panic. He wanted order. He understood that any announcement about his royal future would not belong to him alone. It would affect William, Catherine, Parliament, the Commonwealth, and every person who still looked to the monarchy as a symbol of national steadiness. That is why the timing became so fiercely debated. Speak too soon and the nation might fear collapse. Wait too long, and the palace might appear unprepared. So Charles reportedly searched for the narrow path between duty and reality. Not surrender, not retreat, but a controlled shift, a way to protect the crown without pretending the king was untouched by pressure. And in that private struggle, the announcement began to take shape. As those discussions intensified, another reality became impossible to ignore. The monarchy itself was preparing for a future that might arrive sooner than anyone expected. The moment Charles began considering his royal future, attention naturally shifted to one man. Prince William had spent years preparing for responsibility, but preparation and reality are rarely the same thing. Suddenly, the heir found himself closer to the center of power than ever before. For much of his life, William existed in a strange position. He was always important, always watched, always expected to become king one day. Yet there remained a comfortable distance between inheritance and reality. That distance began disappearing the moment conversations about Charles's future intensified. What had once felt like a chapter waiting somewhere in the future was now becoming part of the present. And with every passing week, the weight of that reality became harder to ignore. Reports suggest that William's role inside the institution expanded steadily as concerns surrounding the king's workload continued. More state matters crossed his desk. More consultations required his presence. More decisions carried his influence. None of it happened through dramatic declarations. Instead, it unfolded through a gradual transfer of responsibility, the kind that often signals preparation long before any official announcement is made. Those watching closely began noticing that the Prince of Wales was no longer simply representing the future of the monarchy. In many ways, he was already helping manage its present. Yet increased responsibility came with increased scrutiny. Every appearance, every statement, every gesture was examined for clues about what might be coming next. Public confidence in William remained strong, but confidence alone could not remove the enormous pressure resting on his shoulders. History offered countless examples of heirs waiting for their moment. Few had to navigate that transition, while the entire world speculated about the future of a reigning monarch. Beside him stood Catherine, whose growing influence quietly strengthened the image of continuity the palace desperately needed. Together, they represented stability during uncertainty. Their partnership reassured supporters of the monarchy and gave the institution something invaluable during a period of speculation: confidence. Insiders claimed senior royals increasingly rallied around that image, understanding that public trust would depend not only on Charles's decisions, but also on the readiness of those expected to follow him. Behind closed doors, preparations reportedly intensified. Not preparations for a crisis, but preparations for possibility. The difference mattered. The monarchy could not afford to be caught unprepared. Every conversation, every briefing, every strategic discussion reflected a growing awareness that history sometimes moves faster than expected. William understood that better than anyone. He was not chasing power. He was preparing to serve if circumstances demanded it. But preparation comes with sacrifice. The closer William moved toward the center of royal responsibility, the more impossible it became to escape the burden of expectation. The nation wanted reassurance, the institution wanted stability, and the heir himself was left carrying questions he could not publicly answer. Yet, William's growing prominence only raised a larger question: what exactly was Charles preparing to tell the nation? When the announcement finally arrived, even seasoned royal observers struggled to believe what they were hearing. It wasn't simply another palace statement. It was a declaration about the future of the monarchy itself, one that instantly transformed the national conversation. The words landed with the force of history. For weeks, Britain had been waiting for clarity, but clarity from the palace rarely comes without consequence. Charles did not speak like a man chasing sympathy. He spoke like a monarch aware that every sentence would be studied, weighed, and remembered. Reports suggest the announcement was carefully shaped to calm the public, while also preparing them for a different royal rhythm, one where duty would continue, but perhaps not in the same form the nation had expected. Almost immediately, the reaction began. Politicians responded with cautious respect. Commentators rushed to interpret the meaning behind every phrase. Royal insiders tried to separate reassurance from revelation. Was this simply a practical adjustment? Was it a deeper signal about the king's future workload? Or was it the first public step toward a transition the palace had been quietly arranging for months? The uncertainty made the moment even more explosive, because what Charles did not say seemed almost as powerful as what he did. Across the country, the emotional response was swift. Supporters saw sacrifice. Critics saw vulnerability. Traditionalists heard the echo of duty under strain. For many, the announcement forced a painful realization. The monarch, who had waited a lifetime to wear the crown, was now being asked to protect it under circumstances no one could have predicted. It was not triumph alone. It was triumph shadowed by suffering, authority marked by limitation, and public service tested by private cost. Then came the questions that palace officials knew would follow. What did this mean for succession? How much responsibility would William now carry? Would Catherine's role expand even further? Could the institution reassure the Commonwealth, Parliament, and the public that stability remained untouched? The palace moved quickly to project calm, insisting through careful language that continuity was secure. But reassurance can only do so much when the public senses that a royal era may be shifting beneath their feet. International media seized on the announcement within moments. Headlines traveled across continents, turning a palace statement into a global story about power, legacy, and the fragile human reality behind royal duty. The historic significance became impossible to deny. Charles had not merely updated the nation. He had opened a door into the monarchy's next chapter, and once that door was open, no carefully written statement could fully close it again. But while the public focused on the announcement itself, insiders were paying attention to something else entirely: the reactions of those closest to the king. Inside the royal household, the announcement triggered a wave of emotions that few outsiders ever witnessed. For some, it was a moment of sadness. For others, a moment of duty. And for a select few, it marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter. William's response, according to those familiar with the palace mood, was not dramatic in the way outsiders might expect. It was controlled, steady, almost painfully composed. That was what made it so powerful. The Prince of Wales understood that his father's decision was not simply a personal matter. It carried the weight of the crown, the fears of a nation, and the pressure of a family that had learned, again and again, that private pain becomes public history when it belongs to a monarch. William had spent years preparing for duty, but this was different. This was duty moving toward him with unmistakable force. Catherine's role became equally important. Reports suggest she offered the kind of support that does not need to be loud to be decisive. She stood as a calming presence in a moment when the institution needed grace as much as strategy. Her influence was not built on command, but on steadiness. And steadiness inside a royal crisis can become its own form of power. For William, she represented balance. For the monarchy, she represented continuity. For the public, she became part of the quiet reassurance that the next chapter would not arrive without care. Senior royals, too, reportedly understood the meaning of the moment. The announcement forced them to set aside smaller tensions and rally around Charles. Whatever private disagreements existed, the institution came first. That is the old rule of the House of Windsor. When the crown is exposed, personal feeling must retreat. Behind closed doors, there were reflections on Charles's long road to the throne, the years of waiting, the criticism endured, the difficult beginning of his reign, and the harsh reality that his time as monarch was being shaped by pressures no one could have fully predicted. Even palace staff felt the emotional shift. Those who had served through weddings, funerals, jubilees, scandals, and transitions sensed that something had changed. The atmosphere was not one of collapse. It was one of gravity. Public displays of loyalty began to matter more. Carefully chosen words from family members carried deeper meaning. Every gesture of support was read as part of a larger message. The monarchy would not fracture under uncertainty. Yet beneath the loyalty, preparations continued. The next phase of royal life was no longer an abstract idea. It was being organized, protected, and quietly brought closer. The announcement had stirred emotion, but emotion alone could not guide the crown forward. Structure had to follow, decisions had to be made, and the people closest to Charles knew that once the world had heard his words, nothing inside the palace could return completely to what it had been before. As emotions settled and headlines spread around the world, attention turned toward the lasting consequences of Charles's extraordinary announcement. Long before he became king, Charles spent decades preparing for a role that many believed would define his life. Now, as the nation absorbed his stunning announcement, people began looking back at the journey that had brought him to this historic moment. For most of his life, Charles lived under the shadow of waiting. He was the heir who had to learn patience in public, the prince who carried expectation before he carried authority, the man judged for what he might become long before he became it. That long apprenticeship shaped him. It hardened him in some ways, softened him in others, and gave his eventual reign a strange emotional weight. When he finally became king, it was not the beginning of a young monarch's rise, but the fulfillment of a lifetime spent preparing for a duty that arrived late and demanded everything. That is why the announcement struck so deeply. It forced people to view Charles not only as a sovereign making a decision, but as a man whose entire life had been tied to the crown's promise. Reports suggest commentators began reassessing his place in royal history almost immediately. They looked again at his commitment to service, his long-standing causes, his attempts to steady the monarchy after years of family conflict, and the quiet difficulty of ruling during a period marked by illness, scrutiny, and public change. His reign had never been simple. It began after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, whose presence had defined Britain for generations. Charles inherited not only a throne, but a comparison that no monarch could easily escape. Every decision was measured against his mother's shadow. Every public act carried the burden of continuity. And yet, within that difficult space, he tried to shape a monarchy that could survive modern pressure without abandoning the older codes of duty, restraint, and national service. The challenges were unforgiving. Family wounds remained visible. Public trust had to be defended. The institution had to balance tradition with a changing world. And through it all, Charles had to present strength even when private realities made strength harder to perform. This is where public feeling began to shift. Some who had once doubted him started to see the cost of the role more clearly. They saw not just privilege, but pressure. Not just ceremony, but sacrifice. Not just a crown, but a burden passed through history. Media analysis turned toward legacy because legacy was now unavoidable. Was Charles's greatest act the time he spent waiting, the causes he championed, or the stability he tried to preserve during one of the monarchy's most delicate chapters? The answer was not simple, but the question itself revealed how far the conversation had moved. His announcement had transformed him from a reigning figure into a historical one, even while his story was still unfolding. Yet legacy is never only about the past, it is also about what comes next and who carries the responsibility forward. With Charles's announcement now echoing across the country, attention shifted toward the future. The monarchy had weathered crises before, but every transition brings uncertainty. The question was no longer what Charles would do, it was what the next generation would become. That question placed William and Catherine at the center of a national conversation they could no longer avoid. For years, they had been seen as the future face of the crown, steady figures waiting behind the curtain of history. But after Charles's announcement, that future felt closer, sharper, and far more demanding. The public was not merely watching them as popular royals. It was watching them as symbols of what the monarchy might become when the old order gives way to a new rhythm. Reports suggest palace advisors understood this instantly. The next era could not rely only on tradition, yet it could not abandon tradition either. That was the delicate line William and Catherine were expected to walk. Modern enough to speak to a changing Britain, respectful enough to protect the sacred trust passed down through generations, warm enough to feel human, strong enough to look unshaken when the pressure becomes unforgiving. It was not just a public image. It was a strategy for survival. The debate over modernization became louder because Charles's announcement made the future feel real. Some wanted a slimmer monarchy, more focused, more practical, less crowded by distant figures and old habits. Others feared that too much change could weaken the mystery that gives the crown its power. William, standing between those forces, faced a challenge unlike many heirs before him. He would not inherit a quiet institution. He would inherit one questioned, examined, criticized, and still deeply woven into national identity. Catherine's role became just as important. Her strength lay in emotional confidence, in the sense that continuity did not have to feel cold. She brought a quieter authority to the future picture, one rooted in family, restraint, and public connection. Alongside William, she offered the monarchy a bridge between old ceremony and modern expectation. And that bridge mattered because younger royals would also have to decide how they fit into the changing landscape. Beyond Britain, the world watched closely. The crown's international image depended on whether the transition looked controlled or uncertain. Every sign of unity strengthened confidence. Every hint of confusion invited speculation. Yet strangely, the announcement also renewed interest in the institution. People who had drifted away from royal affairs began looking again, sensing that history was moving beneath the surface. The royal landscape was changing, not collapsing, not vanishing, changing. And in that change, William and Catherine were no longer distant figures of tomorrow. They were becoming the answer to the question Charles had quietly placed before the nation. And as Britain looked ahead, one final truth emerged from the king's remarkable announcement. Some royal announcements fade with time. Others become defining moments in history. This was one of those moments, not because of what was said alone, but because of what it revealed about duty, sacrifice, and the burden of wearing the crown. In the days that followed, the meaning of Charles's decision only grew heavier. What first appeared to be a single announcement became something much larger, a turning point in the story of the monarchy. It revealed a king trying to protect the institution while facing the limits of his own strength. It revealed a family forced to balance private emotion with public expectation. And it revealed a nation suddenly reminded that the crown, for all its ceremony and grandeur, is carried by human beings who bleed, worry, suffer, and still choose duty. The emotional impact reached far beyond palace walls. People argued over what it meant. Commentators dissected every line. Supporters spoke of courage. Skeptics questioned what might come next. But beneath all the noise, one truth remained clear. Charles had changed the royal conversation. The future could no longer be treated as distant. William's path had become clearer, Catherine's role more essential, and the idea of continuity more urgent than ever before. That was the quiet power of the moment. Charles did not need to abandon the crown to reshape expectations. He only had to acknowledge the reality that the monarchy was entering a new phase. Leadership, in that sense, was not about pretending nothing had changed. It was about guiding the nation through change without letting fear take control. That is where sacrifice became the heart of the story. Charles had waited decades for the throne, yet when the moment came to place the institution above personal pride, he appeared prepared to do exactly that. For William, the announcement became a signal and a warning. The future was not waiting politely in the distance. It was approaching with force. Every decision now mattered more. Every public appearance carried deeper meaning. Every sign of unity inside the royal family became part of the message Britain needed to hear. The monarchy would continue, not because it was untouched by struggle, but because it had learned how to survive it. And so a new royal chapter began not with chaos, but with controlled gravity. Charles's final message resonated because it was built on the oldest royal lesson of all. The crown is never truly about one person. It is about duty passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, through triumph, grief, silence, and sacrifice. And so, as the palace gates closed, and the headlines continued around the world, King Charles's announcement became more than news. It became the moment that defined an era and secured his place in royal history forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.